Welcome to Saturday's Warrior, the channel where we talk all things BYU, Big 12, conference realignment. I'm Trevor, and this is Adam. And this is part of our weekly segments where we break down the games the previous week. Of course, BYU was on a bye week this last week, and then we like to bring in guests later in the week to preview BYU's upcoming opponent. And then, of course, our live reactions, as well as whatever other content we get out throughout the week. So if you have not already, we ask that you please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way you can catch all of that content as it goes out. And there, Adam, I remembered to plug the video at the top instead of just at the bottom of the video. So now we can move on with things. So I got to ask you, Adam, what makes you feel more uplifted, watching general conference or enjoying a bye week where BYU is undefeated, Utah went on a bye week on a loss, BYU moves up despite not playing? I mean, which one? You can be honest. This is a safe space.
Yeah, safe space. I mean, it's close. It's real close there because as a BYU fan, you're just riding high, right? I mean, you got all the momentum in the world right now, and you can do no wrong when you have a bye week because you can't lose. So we're still undefeated. But man, you just can't beat General Conference, right? That was a good 2 days.
I was waiting to see how you answered before I answered, so I'm just going to move on here. But yeah, it was. So it was a nice way to enjoy BYU's week off. Again, I am a big fan of having 2 bye weeks in the season. I think it's necessary, especially these collegiate athletes. Give them a chance to get caught up on school, rest their bodies, whatever. So I think they need to look into. I know it's going to be tougher and tougher with more and more games coming in with the playoff and everything, but they need to, I think, figure something out. But I mean, you're playing week 0 games already. Maybe
I know that maybe you play more week 0 games, you get the extra bye, and just nice to stagger
it. Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's good because BYU is coming back this week relatively healthy, but we'll get into that. What I want to talk about is this crazy weekend of football. And I know you're watching General Conference, but we all had half an eye on these football games as they're going on. And what a slate of football games we had. What is your biggest takeaway from the weekend?
That parity is back in college football. We have missed this for years. It has been Alabama, Georgia, Clemson ruled the world for over a decade. And it was the one thing I disliked about college football. I love parity. The NFL is awesome for that. Anytime you can get that into any league, it benefits everybody. And the college football has been really missing some real parity, and you started to see it this weekend. I hope it wasn't just an anomaly. Every year we get kind of a crazy week like this. I hope it plays out into the postseason, and you really see some stunning upsets, and you get a little more March Madness feel to the collegiate postseason, because I think it's missing that, and it was a fun weekend because of it.
Yeah, so I worry a little bit, and I hope it wasn't just a one-off because it's exciting because you see all these big teams losing, but part of it's early enough in the season that these teams can recover, but also I feel like the SEC can spin this. So unless some teams take major losses, continue to lose, 1, 2, maybe 3 games, then if they have enough of that amongst like Georgia, Alabama, some of their top teams, which I don't think they will, they'll be able to spin it and say, hey, look, every game in the SEC is tough. And nobody can really prove them otherwise because they don't really play anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, and the SEC will do that no matter what. I mean, you could have 4 3-loss teams from the SEC in the playoff. I mean, it's just, especially with the 12-team playoff now. So it's disappointing, but at the end of the day, you got to show out in the playoff. The fact of the matter is, SEC teams are winning a lot of national championships. They are. And is it because they got an auto berth into the playoff? Partly, but it's also because in the playoff they played really well, clutch performances, and kept winning again and again. And so if we want that to stop, we've got to show it on the field. And the only real chance you get it on the field is when it matters most in the playoff. And so now with the 12-team playoff, you get that chance every single year. Even though I do think the committee is going to put 4 SEC teams in there and 3 or 4 Big Ten teams in there every year, and that's just the nature of college football right now. But you know what? I hope we get out there and these other conferences can step up and win some games and prove a point and bring some parity back into the sport.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the only way to stop it is to put up or shut up.
Yep.
So, but it reminds me of, I don't remember what year it was. Was it '07? I think it's the same year that LSU, with 2 losses, went on and won the national championship. I think it was that same year when there was like a week or something at the beginning where like all these top 10 teams were losing, all sorts of chaos, and it was exciting. But again, because there was chaos amongst so many teams, the same teams ended up benefiting, because it's like, yeah, we have 1 loss, but so does everybody else. So the
Yep.
best team still, or those big brands still made it in. And someone in the comments, you guys can remind me maybe what season I'm talking about. I should have gone and researched this ahead of time, but yeah, so that is my concern, but it is certainly fun to watch. And I think that's one of the reasons why people like the Big 12, is because there is parity. I mean, we
Yeah.
look at what's happening every year, and you look at 2 different teams almost every year play for the conference championship, and how much things can swing. We've looked at, and we'll get into a little bit deeper, all the upheaval from year in to year out, to with these top teams. We look at like an Oklahoma State, who was projected to be at the top again for this year, and then they've dropped off, and so on. So it has been wild, in the in all of college football, but Big 12 as always. And this, of course, has allowed BYU to jump off to the start that we've seen them get off to. And so before we get into all the upcoming stuff, I want to know, Adam, how has this start to BYU season changed your expectations for BYU going the rest of the way?
Well,
You and I were both kind of down on the team. You even more so, prior to the season. We were both a little hesitant to get too all in. So what's changed for you?
yeah, I think it has to change somewhat. And I'll tell you, if we go to a bowl game, I'm still happy. We've seen progress on all sides of the ball. And so, really, if, barring a collapse where we don't go to a bowl game, which would be of epic proportion, I'm going to be happy with that kind of progress. But in general, it does change the expectation. We've got, you know, Big Noon Saturday coming to the stadium this weekend, so garnering national attention. You're almost halfway through the season, and you're sitting atop the conference standings. You've got a shot to vie for the Big 12 title. It changes expectations. And so for me, if we finish with 8 or 9 wins, I still think that's a monumental accomplishment for this team based on where they were last year. I think that's a huge accomplishment based on the type of competition they're facing week in and week out. But in general, you see the national pundits start and it's more, expectations are more 9 wins, 10 wins for BYU, and really making a case for going to Arlington at the end of the year and playing for that Big 12 title game. So my expectations personally, I have to temper expectations, because I don't want to. I can't go sky high expectations again and just drop. But you start to feel it. You start to see that discussion, the fact that it's our defense that's anchoring us week in and week out. You feel like you've got something you can rely on. You've got an identity you can rely on week in and week out that's going to keep you in every game. And so even though there's going to be some tough ones, yeah, I could see how we get to 8, 9, and maybe even 10 wins. I expect us to lose one here in the latter half of the season, maybe two. But you feel like outside of that, yeah, you got a chance for 10, 11 wins.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not a game and left on BYU's schedule that makes me think, oh, BYU can't win it. BYU doesn't stand a chance. Like, there's nobody on there that really scares me anymore. Part of it is because of all the reasons you laid out, BYU's and performance exceeding expectations, but it's also because, I mean, honestly, a lot of the teams we were scared of going into the season don't look as scary anymore.
Yeah.
Oklahoma State, as I mentioned, Utah without Cam Rising. I mean, their defense is still solid, but
I'll tell you, even if, and we can get into this later, especially on the week of Holy War, even with Cam Rising, I mean, you go back and he dominated Southern Utah He looked a little shaky against Baylor. Guy hasn't played in forever. I mean, he played a handful of meaningful minutes, if you can call it meaningful, against an FCS opponent. Handful of meaningful minutes against Baylor. That's it. So whenever he does come back, to me, the jury's still out. If you go a year and a half with a struggling offense, I am not convinced that one person, as important as the quarterback is going to turn that offense around. I'm just not. And so everybody's talking about when Cam Rising comes back, when Cam Rising comes back, and Isaac Wilson has been okay in there. And absolutely, they're going to be better with Cam Rising. It's no question. But that much better for an offense that struggles week in and week out for 2 years now. I'm not convinced they're going to be that much better when he comes back and he's playing real competition like he was against Baylor before he got injured. And it wasn't some star-studded affair when he was playing.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said all that because I felt for a while that Cam Rising is a little overrated. Not that he's not a very good quarterback and a steady hand, and and somebody I think that probably instills a lot of confidence in the rest of the team, just knowing he's back there. But I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I just feel like not to use the game manager trope, but I feel like he goes in and kind of does what he has to, and he has a lot of talent around him, and he can allow them to do their thing, and he can do enough to, and he knows how to orchestrate the game, which is it's just something, that's not nothing to understand the offense and where your strengths are and where to get the ball and but I don't think he's beating us by himself. And like you said, this offense is struggling in enough ways that I don't know if he alone can turn that around. I think we're starting to see some cracks in the facade of Utah already. And so, yeah, but to my point, all of that just strengthens my point there a little bit. We saw UCF, which is still, according to FPI, the which is what it is. It's FPI. Put how much stock into it you'd like to, but that's the game that FPI has is like BYU's highest likelihood of losing still on our record, even more so than Utah. And FPI still has BYU though at 9 wins for the season. It went down a little bit from where they had us last week, which is crazy after all the things that happened. But yeah, I feel very good. I'm not saying that I think BYU will win every game, but there's not a game on this schedule that makes me think, okay, BYU can't go in there and win it, or at the very least be competitive in that game. And so, yeah, my expectations have changed, but I try not to get ahead of myself too much and try to uh, temper, sorry, my expectations and really, I'm trying to think, okay, if we could get to, I mean, yes, bowl game first and foremost, take it one game at a time. But I do think 8 and 9 wins is not out of the realm. I mean, 4 out of your next 7 seem 3 to 4, I guess, out of your next 7 seems very, very achievable for this team, especially with some of the teams we have left on the schedule. And I don't think that's overreaching. And I think that's a fair kind of realistic look at this, but I still look at it, I think there's no reason why BYU couldn't get to 10 or 11. It feels unlikely. It's so hard to win every game. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if a bottom dweller came out and shocked someone like
Oh
Houston or
yeah.
something. You can't overlook anybody. And so you still have to go out there and compete and win those games. You got to stay healthy, and that's something that BYU's done pretty well this season. We're getting LJ Martin back, which is huge. Obviously, Connor Pay is out, which is a big bummer. That we saw that affect our offensive line play a little bit in Baylor, and it'll help getting improved running. But as we saw last year, if they can't get things in order there, it's going to be hard to get the run game going now, even with LJ Martin back. Having said that, it was a perfect time to have a bye week to give you 2 weeks to really focus on that and
Yeah.
work on it. So yeah, I'm with you. Could BYU, go to Arlington, play for the Big 12 championship, potentially make it to the playoff? Yes. But I am not counting my eggs before they hatch. I am just going to sit here and enjoy the season and go for the ride and enjoy every step along the way. I usually try to, by doing that, I usually try to not get too far ahead of myself and not enjoy it so much and say, okay, I'll wait till the end, then we can celebrate, after we've done it. And I'm trying to change course this year. I'm trying to just enjoy the journey and not be so stressed about it along the way, and say, you know what, this is fun. We've had some fun games. We may lose one, two, three, maybe even four more, but we've had a great season. Like you've said, we've seen progress. So I'm really excited about it. Apparently, as you've already mentioned, the we're getting some national noise as well. We're getting Big Noon Fox going to Provo, which is really cool to be highlighted like that. But that puts a big spotlight on this game when BYU's kind of made a made kind of a thing of being overlooked. And I just think back to flashbacks. I was there when College Game Day came against when BYU had TCU in town, and that did not go well. And so I'm a little bit worried, especially when this team has had that underdog mentality. Is it going to be, you've had an extra week to think about, okay, look at us, look how well we're doing. We're ranked. We move up in the rankings. We've got Big Noon Saturdays, whatever it's called, coming to town. And, was it too much time that they have time to start thinking about it and drink their own Kool-Aid? Do they lose focus a little bit? Well, I don't know. What do you think on that?
Well, yeah, it's all going to come down to the mentality of the team, and it's been really impressive their mental state in each game, because they could have lost focus a lot. They could have, the Big 12 opener against Kansas State, or coming off of Kansas State. What impressed me about the Baylor game was not necessarily that they won, is that they started so strong, coming off of, in some ways, an historic victory against Kansas State. I mean, just a huge game with their fans going crazy, and all the attention that got. You have those letdown games. That's what happened to Alabama going into Vandy. And so a letdown game happens all the time, and BYU did not. They had a lot of mental fortitude, not only to come out strong after that Kansas State game, but then to hold on in the second half when they needed to. So it feels like there's a lot of focus on this football team, that they can do it. But you're right. If they start believing that they've arrived or that they've done something, then I could easily see Arizona coming in and surprising them. They've done such a good job writing that 5-7 mentality throughout the first half of the season. They've got to keep it with them the second half of the season. They've got to remember what it's like to be 5-7 at the end of the year, because they've got 5 victories. That's great. They haven't surpassed last year's total. So who's to say they've done anything more than last year yet? So you hope there's that mentality, and certainly that's exactly what the coaches are saying. That's what the team captains are saying. It's a question of whether or not they really embrace that. And so far, every week they have. So you hope coming out of the bye week, it's they're rested, they're healthy, they've had time to scheme, time to plan, and they're going to come out and make another statement, as Kalani keeps saying.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think BYU's shown a different kind of mentality this year, and so I want to believe, and I'm prone to believe that this team is built a little different, and that this team is going to stay focused and come out and play. Now, that doesn't guarantee that they'll win, but that they're not going to let the distractions be the reason why, that they're going to show up and do their thing. So, my question is, so let's say BYU makes it to to the conference championship game. They don't win. How high do you think they have to be ranked with, and how many losses can they have and still be in contention for an at-large bid?
Yeah, only one loss, and you've got to be top 10, because a lot of it depends on where the G5 entry lands, right? So that's Boise State right now. I don't know if anybody's going to stop their running back. So it depends where they land. It also depends if the other conference championships play out with the top ranked team winning the conference championship, and where those rankings land. So there's a lot. It's not just getting into top 12. BYU has got to be ranked 9th or 10th safely to win. So that means you got to go in, probably, if you're going to lose the conference championship and still make it into the playoff, it's undefeated regular season. You got to go undefeated into that conference championship. Then you have an argument to say we're in the playoffs no matter what. If they're one loss going into the conference championship is their second loss. It's hard to see BYU staying top 10. It's possible, but that's hard to say. So to me, if you really want to book your pass to the playoff, regardless of the outcome in a conference championship game, I think you got to go undefeated.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so I've had mixed feelings because as I watch these other Big 12 games, and I'm trying to decide who I'm rooting for. I was rooting for Arizona because we play them. We don't have Texas Tech, but really for the conference, it's great to have Texas continue to win. I love rooting against Iowa State, mostly just because they hate BYU, and so I hate them back, kind of a thing. And but it's good for the Big 12 to have them ranked up there as well. Of course, I want my top priority over the conference is BYU getting in. I and however that is, if it's at the expense of the rest of the conference, I don't care as long as BYU makes it. Like that's my top priority. But it would be great if the Big 12 were in position to get two teams into the playoff. I just think at 12, I think it's very unlikely. The way everything
Yeah.
is is built, especially with the preseason polls and all these expectations put in on these brands. I mean, you look at the shifting in the polls from week to week, and it makes no sense. I mean, you have it really doesn't. No, they're not looking at the full body of work of teams. They're saying, "Oh, you lost, so we have to move you down a little bit, and you won, and so we get to move you up a little bit."
Yeah.
It's it's not really starting from scratch each week and say, okay, here was our expectations. Forget that. Now let's look at what has this team done.
And that's where we hope a committee approach has a little different view on it. Um, because it's not built on preseason expectation like the polls are. The polls are so tough because you're cemented into preseason expectations. The committee certainly draws from that and leans heavily on rankings, which draw from preseason expectations. So it's not clean, um, but yeah, the polls are always going to be like that. Is BYU the 14th best team in the country? Maybe, maybe. I hope so. Is that a little high if I'm just looking at how teams play and how I don't know. I'd put us somewhere around there, but it feels like we jumped up by nature of people losing in front of us, and it's so hard to say. Did they have a bad week? Are they a better team? It's polls. That's what makes college football fun. College basketball is the same way. Who knows? The ranking system is a blast just to see who gets up there and who loses and the controversy it causes. But it is completely a flawed system.
Yeah, the problem with the committees is that they're political, and so you can't tell me there aren't other influences and things
Oh,
at play. I
absolutely.
mean, everyone's biased on some level. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, like you mentioned, BYU did benefit from this. Having a bye week, still moving up, and I think do I think they're necessarily the 14th best team in the nation? Maybe, maybe not. But I think when we look at the complete body of work to date, which is all we really have, forget about preseason expectations, forget about where we think teams will end up. If we're looking at what has happened today, up to today, and we look at that and what teams have shown us so far, I think you really have to go off of that and not, I don't know, they got an easy schedule the rest of the way. I think they can win out, whatever. Like none
Right.
of this,
Right.
and so
Well, and I think that'll we'll get to that in our power rankings, but that's where I think you have the power rankings are fun because you can look at that and just say, all right, who at this point in the season, what's the body of work, what's been done, and then forget who was ranked where in the preseason.
yeah, perfect. So let's actually jump to our power rankings right now before we get into our picks for the week and jump in to see where we think teams are at. So um, put this up here. It's kind of a lot up there, but when looking at this, that is the approach that I took. I don't know how you do it, but I kind of went in this clean. I've done other power rankings throughout the season. I went in completely clean and just ranked them based off of what I think they've done so far
Mm-hmm.
and what um it really and kind of where they're at, kind of where momentum has them right now, what they've done lately. And so that was my mindset going into this. Now we have the first five picks the same. So why don't we go by row? Why don't you tell me what walk us through the first four here in this and
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating how we lined up on those first five picks. But I put BYU number one for two reasons. One, you don't get to do that very often to put your own team number one, and I'd take every advantage if there's an argument to put us up there to put us number one. So that was pretty fun. But number two, the reason why I think there's a legitimate case for BYU as number one is the strength of schedule. No one has the quality of wins that we do. No one does.
Yep.
And to beat Kansas State the way we did high quality win to beat SMU at SMU and see what they've done since then. They're just the quality of wins we have is unmatched by anyone else in the conference right now. So that's why I think we are a clear number one. Not necessarily far and away, but I think there's a clear case for BYU to be number one. Iowa State, the fact that they're undefeated. Kansas State has looked amazing. And Colorado, in like fashion, beating conference opponents. What they did at UCF on the road was very, very impressive, coming off of an emotional Baylor win. So that top row, I think, has earned it just based on the type of victories they've had.
Yeah, I'm with you on all that, obviously. And with BYU, I think that is the big thing, and I think they're not getting enough credit in the national rankings for that reason, is because of what they've done to date. Now, that's obviously going to change as more teams have more opportunities to play other ranked teams and build up their resumes, especially as BYU's schedule gets that much lighter. But to date, I think BYU definitely has done more than Iowa State. I wasn't a, I was still, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say I didn't believe in Iowa State going into last week. I just still didn't feel like we'd seen enough from them to really know. And so that's why I have them there. I'm looking at the next row. I've got Texas Tech. I think they've really turned things on. They've looked very good. Now they've had some close wins, but I think that's also a sign of a good team being able to pull things out. And they let Arizona back in it, but then they found a way to come back and win. And so found them very impressive. I think they will be a tough out through the rest of the season. West Virginia, they do have a couple losses, but I look at what they've done in their wins, who they've played, and I think they've shown that they're tough. And I think that, I don't know. I just think they have the potential to go in and beat anybody, but they also, can have a lot of mistakes and have potential to lose to a lot of teams. But I think the way they went in and handled business against Oklahoma State really showed that this team still has that potential that was kind of talked about before the season began.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm sold on West Virginia. That's why I've got them down at 9. I agree with you. I think their victories, they've looked good. I haven't seen enough from them to put them above a one-loss team. And I feel like in their losses, they have not looked good. And so we may learn a lot about them this weekend when Iowa State travels to West Virginia, and to see if they can at least stay close and be competitive against Iowa State. I think West Virginia's been dealt a tough hand, and to come out, they're probably better than a 3-3 team if they lose to Iowa State this weekend. But I struggle because of the way they've lost to put them ahead of some of those one-loss teams.
Yeah. I'd almost look at this as tiers. If you look at it, I think we're the same 6 through 10 there. We have the same teams there. And so it's,
Mm-hmm.
ranking is in the order is a little bit, you can make some arguments, but I think you got that top 5 and then that next 5, and then you've got kind of your bottom dwellers at this point. And so, there's, you can kind of pick nits on any of these teams. Utah, same thing. They haven't done a lot. They're what was viewed as an impressive win against Oklahoma State looks to be a little bit fraudulent now, and
Mm-hmm.
they struggled against Baylor. They handled Baylor struggled in that game to put up points, but Utah really couldn't do too much with it. I mean, granted, they lost Rising in that game, so it was really hard to tell.
But they had them at home, right? Early
Yeah.
early in the season. I mean, I agree. You look at where Baylor's gone from there. Loss at Colorado, loss at home to BYU, loss on the road to Iowa State. Um, and the scores in those games, teams have been able to put up points on Baylor. Utah could not. And they did again, as you mentioned, they lost their starting quarterback, but even before then it didn't look great for Utah on the scoring offense.
Why I have Cincy at 8 though is because I just think that they've looked impressive. They did have that close loss to Pitt, but they've had some more impressive wins than someone like ASU. They've had bigger margins of victory, and just overall kind of looked like they've put it together a little bit more. ASU, on the other hand, looks like some of those wins they had were looking a little bit less impressive at this point. They struggled a lot against Kansas, and so but they've still won, which is why I have them ahead of Arizona, even though Arizona beat Utah, which again is looking maybe not as impressive as we thought it was. And then in those other games, even though the Kansas State game was not counted as a conference game. It's still a conference opponent. They got wiped out by them. Texas Tech really seemed to have their number until late, and then Arizona still wasn't able to pull it out. So that's why I have them behind them.
Yeah, and I think this weekend will kind of solidify where Arizona falls. To me, they're the toughest team to predict in the Big 12 because they have so much talent
Yeah.
and they've played to that talent a couple times and they've played severely under that talent a couple times. And so it's really hard to tell which Arizona you're going to get. And as a BYU fan, that's terrifying coming into this weekend where we feel like we've got a lot riding on this game. And I don't know what Arizona's going to show up. We could go out there and we could win 38-3, and we could also be in a dogfight and, and be up against an Arizona team that's clicking on all cylinders and scoring points left and right. So you just don't know which Arizona team you're gonna see, and they're dangerous when they're on, but when they're off, they just struggle to put it together, offense or defense.
Yeah. And then quickly, I'll just blow through the rest of these. I think Baylor, who we've already talked about, I think they've shown a lot of potential and they're like almost there. And so they keep losing these games where they're really competitive in. They could have beaten Colorado. They've been in it and they just haven't been able to put it all together. But I think they have a good foundation. Houston has just been surprising. Kansas, even though their record suggests this is the Kansas of old, they've been in most of these games. And so, I feel like even their losses have looked more impressive than some of these other teams. Oklahoma State just looks like they're just spiraling out of control. UCF, they barely beat TCU, who is also spiraling out of control. I mean, getting embarrassed by SMU and then just really not being able to bounce back from that against Houston is really telling. So I think TCU, just where their momentum is, but UCF barely beating TCU. Then what was having Colorado come to town? That one was a big hyped game. They totally laid an egg, and then to have a chance to go in against a struggling Florida team, and they just look completely outmatched. So I have those two down at the bottom. Again, this doesn't mean this is who I think is best. This is who I think is worst. This is to reflect the body of work to date. And now I do expect this to continue to mix up as the season goes on.
Yeah, and I think you're probably right about TCU. I would probably have them a little bit lower in this. That loss to Houston was bad coming off of the SMU loss. So really bad couple of weeks there. Houston hasn't shown me enough. I know they beat TCU and that was great for them, and they beat Rice, but boy, I'm not convinced. And Kansas, they cannot put it together. And I agree, they've been competitive in all of them, but they don't know how to win. They keep giving games away. Jalen Daniels is throwing interceptions like he's 2023 Jake Retzloff. I mean, I don't know what he's doing back there. It's so bizarre to see that Kansas team play that poorly. And until they win, until they do something on the field to close out a game, I can't put them up from that last spot as the bottom dweller. Um, but we'll see that UCF. I'll keep a close eye on. Obviously, they're an upcoming opponent, and so I'm more and more hopeful that we're we're able to go down there and compete. I had that one circled as our one of our toughest games, and it may still be, but they have looked really bad the last couple of weeks. And at this point in the season, you worry about the psyche of the team in that bottom tier. How long can Kansas continue to bring it every game before? I mean, it just wears on you. I know these guys are athletes and this is what they do, and they've done it every year for the last 20 years. But eventually, it just wears on you. And it's hard to bring it when you're 1-5, and bring the heat when you're 1-7 and 2-9, and so that worries me about Baylor, Kansas, TCU, UCF, OSU. It's tough. It's tough to put it together week to week when you're having a losing season.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. But again, that bodes well. I mean, Kansas, who is going to be one of our tough matchups. This was going to be, one of our revenge games. Oklahoma State, both of us have them in that bottom row, and those are upcoming matchups. And UCF, so that bodes
Hmm.
well for BYU and UCF. That's why I couldn't believe, even after FPI still has that as BYU's toughest matchup. And I think going to Orlando, it will be tough. Like there's no guarantee. They still have talent. They're still really well coached. I'm just saying that game does not look like, what it looked like, what we thought it was
Yep.
before the season. So
Yep. Agreed.
ASU, it's crazy that they look scarier than a lot of these other teams. And that was like our gimme on the calendar before the season.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get to our picks now. I review that, and then we can move on. And then want to talk a little bit quickly. So let's quickly get through our picks, then we'll get back into. I want to talk a little bit about the game this week. So yeah,
That's a lot of red.
this
You doing
happens.
okay, Trevor?
Hey, there were a lot of upsets this week. I'll let you know. I just did not call any of the right ones. Uh, so yeah. I mean, I didn't call any. I think we both thought TCU was going to bounce back. I think we thought Oklahoma State would bounce back. That West Virginia's kind of been all over the place, and Oklahoma's OSU was they were kind of like that last year. They had some low lows and some high highs, and I thought,
Yeah,
okay, this might be their chance to kind of prove people wrong. I took a chance on Baylor. They looked good late. I don't know how much of that game you watched, but they were keeping it close, and I thought this might actually happen. But then, kind of like BYU last year, there were a few games where BYU was in through three quarters, and then
and then fell
things
apart.
fell apart. And
Yeah.
it looks like that's where Baylor is, kind of that kind of team this year. UCF, yeah. And then Kansas, again, they looked like they were going to pull it off. I was getting excited. I was like, what, if that offsets my Baylor pick, that's okay. It's a wash. And then Arizona, uh, that one was like a real 50-50 for me. So I don't
Yeah.
feel too bad about that one.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a Texas Tech believer now. I was going into last week, but I was still a little unsure. And at this point, I'm riding high with Texas Tech. That's a good football team. I like it because of the redemption story, getting crushed in week one to a good Washington State team, barely eking out a victory over FCS. Now all of a sudden, they're rolling off some victories, and it's cool. I like seeing that.
Yeah, yeah. So good for Texas Tech. And did they? I guess. Well, I'll talk about it next to see if they gave us a blueprint on how to beat Arizona. But let's go into. Sorry, I got to click on the right place to make that work. All right, so here's our overall, real quick. You obviously made up some ground again.
Got some
I
breathing
mean,
room there.
after last week, I was breathing down your. It's okay. We've still got several more games to go, or weeks to go. So this is this week's only 5 games this week in the Big 12. So less room for error, but also we picked pretty much the same except for the UCF Cincy game. So why don't you tell us what you're thinking there?
Yeah, I haven't lost all faith in UCF. I feel like they've got the team, they got the athletes. I trust their coach. They're at home. Since he's got to travel a long way to do it, since he's much improved, but I don't know if they've really found that winning mentality yet. Of course, maybe UCF hasn't either. So I just feel like the intangibles lean towards UCF a little bit more. I wouldn't be surprised at all if since he goes in there and sort of deals a death blow to UCF season. If they lose this one, look out. I think UCF's going to spiral. They may not have a winning season, and that's where I feel like UCF's feeling beaten down. Their backs are against the wall. There was a hugely hyped game against Colorado where they just got beat down, and it feels like they just couldn't bounce back from that against Florida, where that's a game I think they should have won. And so to me, sometimes it takes a couple weeks. I think they'll get their sea legs under them. I think they'll have a good showing against Cincinnati because it is that feeling of, okay, we've got to take control of our season again, and this is it. And I think UCF is a superior team, and they're at home. They've just been underachieving, whereas since he's been overachieving. So to me, it's a 50-50 game. I go UCF because they're at home.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised either way, but I think Cincy feels like they've been overlooked and that they've really come out so far this season and shown that they've come a long way from last season. They're still fighting those preseason expectations. And so I think this is a game, but either way, it really is. I mean, we say this every week, but it's kind of a prove it week for both these teams. Cincy can say, hey, we're coming in, we're going to keep competing, or UCF can say, no, we're not done yet. So we'll see. Going back through it, I don't know, what were you thinking with Utah ASU? Because for me, I think ASU's had some good wins, but they still haven't shown a lot. I still think Utah has a lot of talent too.
Yeah, and I feel like you do, where ASU just they've won, but their victories have not been as impressive as we thought earlier on. They've struggled a little bit, and I feel like Utah's going to be a little too much for them, whether or not their supposed quarterback plays. I don't think that matters much. I think the Utah defense will control this enough to get them a
Right.
victory.
Yeah, I think their defense can win this game, and Wilson. I mean, I always get thrown off. Isaac and Zach are a little too,
Right?
Isaac. It's a little too similar. I always have to think twice. But Isaac Wilson, I mean, he does look good. He definitely has a lot of potential. A Utah fan should be excited about him. He's obviously not there yet, but I think when the kind of like how BYU feels similar, except I think we're higher on Jake right now, but our defense can keep us in games. Our offense can do enough, and I think that's the
Yeah.
case. Iowa State, I think, made me a believer this last week. And
Oh yeah.
then a big game outside of BYU Arizona, which should be really exciting, is Colorado Kansas State. Now we both went with Kansas State, even though Colorado's been hot lately. One thing that I think is interesting, because I was looking into, I was like, okay, so who are Colorado outside of Nebraska? Who are their biggest Big 12 rivals that they'll be playing in this conference with? And the one that kind of came to the top of that of the existing conference members was Kansas State. So this could be fun. It's a late game up in the mountains again. Does this spell trouble for Kansas State?
It could. The environment could spell trouble. We'll see if they learned anything from their BYU game. And this is the game to me. Kansas State is a more complete team, but Colorado can prove all doubters wrong. If Colorado wins this one, uh, I think they've got a real shot at playing in Arlington. I will be a believer in the Buffs if they can pull this one out. Even though they're at home, Kansas State is such a complete team. They have played with a chip on their shoulder since that BYU game. They're playing angry. They're playing hard. They know they can't lose another one. And I think they're such a good team that they'll go in and take some lessons learned from the BYU game and exercise some of those demons against Colorado.
Yeah, we will see. I'm still hesitant to believe in Colorado, but like you said, at some point you'll have to buy in if they keep winning. So, okay, so this game, what do we make of the matchup with Arizona? What do you expect to see? What have we seen from them, from Arizona so far? And what have they shown as a team? And what do we expect? How do we expect them to match up with BYU?
Yeah, so I mean, Arizona has dynamite potential and a ton of inconsistency. You look at the matchup with Fafita and McMillian, their wide receiver. There's nothing like it in the Big 12. We will never play a combo like this in the Big 12. But teams have keyed on that and just said, you know what, we're going to focus on shutting this receiver down, which you can't shut a guy like that down completely, but you limit his catches, you limit his touches, and then you try and focus the rest of your resources on the rest of the team. But you've got to make sure that guy cannot go off for 300 yards like he did against New Mexico. And so he is wildly talented, but teams have shown that if you can stop that or at least slow it down, then you got a shot against Arizona. And so I like our chances primarily because of Jay Hill. Jay Hill has proven to be so good week in and week out. And because Arizona is a team that other teams have been able to scheme against without incredible defenses, I think Jay Hill can do that. And BYU has had an elite defense this year. So I look for our defense to lead the way and really show out strong against Arizona. The offense honestly will ride on the broad shoulders of Sonny Makassini. If we have a center that can make the right calls and our offensive line is clicking, we've got LJ back, we've got all the tools. If we can establish a ground attack, our offense can be consistent again, can be scary, and can be effective. But it's going to depend on the offensive line. It kills you because it feels like the first couple of games we had our running backs and the offensive line couldn't put it together. Then the offensive line really got going, and we were going with our fifth and sixth string running backs who did well, but you're still not LJ Martin. So you've got your starter back, and now your starting center goes out. So if the offensive line can continue that momentum, I really like our chances against Arizona. But I think it really comes down to Jay Hill's scheme and whether or not the offensive line can play. Trevor, you're on mute. I'm sure your voice sounds beautiful right now, though.
So yeah, I think you're right. They definitely, I think Arizona relies a lot on big chunk plays, and they have the talent to do that. They're obviously, not that they don't have talent across the board, but they definitely are top heavy with their big stars. And so I don't know. I wonder if BYU decides to lock in on that. Like Baylor, they chose to lock down the run. That meant they were a little bit vulnerable to the pass. I think this game is the opposite. Arizona when looking at it, they are 83rd in rush yards per game, and they're 127th in rush attempts.
Wow.
So they
Wow.
really rely on the pass. And then they are 79 in rush yards allowed per game. So
Mm.
not great at the run or stopping the run, really, although 93rd in pass yards allowed. So really just their defense is not solid at all. But 83rd in rush yards per game. BYU is 86th, but we've struggled with running and we've had our top running back out. And so for me, I just think if they rely on big chunk plays and they struggle making, methodical drives down the field, this sounds kind of like BYU. You force us into making a lot of plays, and that those mistakes will come. And then if you're on third and long, force them into a lot of those situations. Then, so I think if you take that deep pass off, and now that might mean we give up a little bit more in the run game, but I think that's something we can live with if they're just getting a little. If they're having to run a lot of plays and slowly move down the field. And now, for whatever reason, I think I even mentioned last week talking about Noah Fafita in terms of dual threat. I don't know if he really is a dual threat. I guess that's just kind of the perception I had of him, but he doesn't have to run a lot, so he doesn't. I don't know
I,
how.
I think he's the Retzlaff type where he can run. He's fast enough to be considered dual threat. He doesn't have to run a lot, and they're really, as you mentioned, they're a pass heavy offense. I do worry. I mentioned this last week how our defense hasn't really played that pinpoint accurate passer uh, too often this season, if at all. And Sawyer Robertson really leaned into that and threw some amazing passes. Wide receivers had amazing catches. They were playing out of their minds in the second half, and I worry a little bit. Our pass defense has been so locked down, but is that because we've been playing lesser able quarterbacks? I mean, Avery Johnson's a great quarterback, not a super polished passer yet. So we made him look pretty bad in the passing game. But Noah Fafita is experienced. He's a very good passer. Does he threaten our secondary a little bit in ways that other quarterbacks haven't, just because they haven't had the talent? And so we come in with this vaunted pass defense, but are we overrated there because we played bad, well, relatively bad passers compared to other teams? And Fafita comes in and starts throwing the ball all over the place. So I hope that isn't the case, but that does worry me. The level of competition and passing quarterbacks. We play good offenses, but I don't know that we play pinpoint passers that often.
You're right. It's easier said than done. Yeah, just because we've shut down other quarterbacks does not mean we can with him. But I just wonder if that's the game plan and really make that more difficult. Now that might mean having double teaming down there in the with the secondary or whatever. But and then also again, you're going to give up something somewhere. But looking at this, the number of carries he's done this year, he had 1, 3, 3, 2, and then 6 against Texas Tech. So
Interesting.
he does not. Maybe he
So
can,
not a running quarterback.
but he does
I,
not often
he
do it.
looks fast to me. I mean, you watch the highlights when they beat Utah, and the way he moved around the pocket really stood out to me. Not just because he's moving around like a quarterback should, but he's fast. And when he's sprinting out and beating linemen out to a throw on the run, he looked fast. So, but I haven't watched a ton of Arizona football, and based on the stats you're sharing, no, he's not a running quarterback.
So again, I don't know if if that could change because he does seem to have the speed. And one thing I saw, again, this was I didn't watch the full game. I kind of turned on later and caught it, but I noticed shortly after turning on, there were like 3 consecutive plays where he rolled out to his right. He was pushed out of the pocket and rolled to his right. And after a while, the defense kind of cues in on that. And so if that there's a tendency like that and maybe he doesn't, I'd have to look at the stats. But if that is in fact a tendency that he has, I can guarantee if someone like me can identify that Jay Hill's going to be all over that and know how to take advantage of that. And again, force turnovers. That's something that Texas Tech did. Arizona had been very good about not turning the ball over. I think Arizona actually had more total yards than Texas
Mm.
Tech, and still lost. So, which is something BYU can do, win without necessarily winning the yardage battle there. So, one thing I wanted to look at. So, what is I want to look at score prediction. And actually, I should take this off. What is before I show you what is your score prediction for the game?
For this game, I'm going to say 24-17 BYU.
Oh, lower scoring. Okay.
Lower scoring.
Lower score. It could be. I've been all over the place. Um, these are all of mine so far. I put it up there because I was pretty close on a couple of these. I was way off here, although the differential wasn't too far off. This game was another one
That
against,
SIU prediction's impressive.
yeah, and Wyoming's not so far
And
off.
Wyoming.
And then I did not get the Kansas State one right.
Shocking.
But a lot of these other ones, again, I mean, the total differential, what is that? 6 points and then 7. So not so far off, but I've either been spot on or basically not on at all. So it's been a couple weeks. We'll see if I'm able to nail any of these other ones. I thought I had a trend going early on in the season, was feeling pretty good about it. As long as BYU wins, I don't really care, but I was going a little bit higher. I was thinking 31-24, something like that. I do think as much as we'll be able to get them out of their groove, I think that they will still be able to put up points, and they seem to average outside of the outlier of New Mexico, or even if you take the loss out, they really average in the low 20s in their scoring, whether win or lose. So I'm gonna say that's kind of where they live. Although if that's their average, I like to think our defense could take them out of that. But I don't know. I'm excited though. I am ready after a week off of college football to get back to it, and I've been rewatching the kind of the 10-minute highlights of the last few games that we've played against Arizona in the Satake era, recent history. So, man, it has just been fun. It's been too long. As much as I'm a fan of these bye weeks, I miss it. So I need BYU football back and excited, even though it's a day game. What is, after the score, all that stuff, what is your big, I guess, prediction at this point for the game? What are we ending on? What can we expect to see from BYU against Arizona?
I'm picking Retzlaff finally puts it together for 2 halves. Coming off a
Okay.
bye week, had plenty of time to scout. I think your run game will be there enough. LJ Martin's back. It's going to be enough, but we're not going to give him 25 carries in his first game back. So it's going to be enough to respect the run, but we're going to lean on Retzlaff's arm again. And I think he's going to come through with 300 plus yards passing and have a big game, a big statement game, and hopefully signal bright things for the rest of the season. But I look at him. I know he's been good, but I don't think he's had that breakout, put it together for 4 quarters game yet. And I think this will be it.
Nice. I love to hear it. I sure hope that's true. Again, if you haven't done so already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, catch out all of our videos. Again, we've got guests coming on this week to talk about Arizona, break it down and get to know the opponent a little bit more and dive into the numbers we talked about a little bit today, but get their perspective. And then, of course, we'll be with you after the game to do a live reaction, win or lose, rain or shine. We will be there. So please be sure to come check all of that. And as always, go Cougs.
Go Cougs.